Hey everyone, welcome back to our second session today on polyvagal theory and trauma from Deb Dana. Deb is a clinician and consultant who specializes in working with complex trauma. She is a consultant to the Traumatic Stress Research Consortium in the Kinsey Institute, clinical advisor to Chiron Clinics, and an advisor to Unite. She developed the Rhythm of Regulation clinical training series and lectured internationally on ways polyvagal theory informs work with trauma survivors. Deb is the author of Polyvagal Theory and Therapy, Polyvagal Exercises for Safety and Connection, co-editor of clinical applications of the polyvagal theory, and creator of the polyvagal flip chart. For more information on Deb's work, please see www.rhythmofregulation.com. So, Deb, it's a delight to have you here with us today. Whenever you're ready, just get started, and really looking forward to this.
I will get started. This is lovely, and it's lovely to be with all of you. Good afternoon. It's good morning for me, but good afternoon to most of you, I think. So let's dive in, and let's start with this very first quote, the Thich Nhat Hanh quote: "Earth will be safe when we feel in us enough safety." And if we're going to really explore today how the nervous system is going to help us feel safe, find safety, create pathways of connection. So the autonomic nervous system is the platform for our lived experience. It really is the heart of our daily living experience. Excuse me. It's our internal surveillance system that's at work all the time, listening to what's happening in our worlds. And it's this lovely biological resource that we all have inside us. And we want to make sure we understand this piece, that the nervous system is the common denominator in our human experience. And it's organized in basically the same way, and then it's shaped individually by our experience. So we're going to both understand the broad organization, and then you're going to get an experience of befriending your own particular patterns. And the nervous system is really where our stories begin. This lovely figure on the right, the autonomic state, then gets fed up to the brain where we create a story. So even though we think that our brains are the ones that are leading the way, that they're creating our stories, what in fact is happening is the nervous system is sending energy and information up the pathways to the brain. And then the brain is taking that information and making a story to try and make sense of what it's receiving from the body. So let's see where we go next. So here, the three organizing principles of polyvagal theory, and this is the easiest way to think about polyvagal theory. And some of you may be very familiar with polyvagal theory, and some of you may be new to it, and somewhere in between. So anyway, we'll just do these three organizing principles, which I think is the way for us to understand how our nervous system is organized and how we're navigating daily living because of these three principles. So the first is co-regulation. And co-regulation is what we call a biological imperative, meaning that we don't survive as humans without another human to co-regulate with. Neuroception, which is detection without awareness. It's the way our nervous system takes in information without the thinking parts of our brain being involved. And then hierarchy, which are these three predictable pathways of response that we travel: ventral, vagal, sympathetic, and dorsal. We're going to take each of one of these individually and look at them and really get to know them. So co-regulation, let's start there. So we have these two experiences going on all the time. We have a drive to survive and a longing to connect. And sometimes they work in concert with each other, so that our longing to connect and our drive to survive are helping us move forward into approach, into connection, into creating these deep, wonderful relationships that we navigate with. And oftentimes this longing to connect and the drive to survive are operating to come into connection with someone, but we can't quite do it, right? Instead, we end up being anxious or argumentative or running away or disconnecting and just disappearing from the relationship. And that's when our drive to survive is getting these cues of danger that say, don't connect, don't connect. Those are built in to our nervous systems through our past experiences. And then we travel these familiar pathways. So you might begin to think, am I in a moment where my longing to connect and my drive to survive are coming in the same direction? Or is this experience of my so wanting to reach out to this person and come into connection, and yet something stops me? And that's your drive to survive. So here is a quote. Stephen Porges is the developer of Polyvagal Theory and a dear friend and colleague. This is his quote: "Trauma is a chronic disruption of connectedness." I think that's a really lovely way to think about trauma. It's very simple. It's very clear. And if we're looking at trauma through the lens of the autonomic nervous system, this is the experience in a nutshell. Chronic disruption of connectedness. And our trauma stories are carried in these states of dysregulation, our nervous system dysregulation. So we're going to play around with how do we stay in connection, and how do we begin to create pathways of protection where we have pathways or how do we create pathways of connection, where we now have pathways of protection. We are in an ongoing autonomic conversation. Right? This conversation is happening every micro moment we are alive. And it's happening between us and ourselves, between us and others, between us and the world around us, and between us and spirit. So in this moment, your nervous system is in those four streams of conversation. Your nervous system and my nervous system are beginning to get to know each other. We're having an autonomic conversation where your system is looking for cues of safety and danger. And my system is sending, hopefully, cues of safety towards you. Although it may be sending cues of danger, there may be something in my voice, in my appearance, in my movements, even in my environment here and back, that's a cue of danger to you. So I'm taking a moment just to settle in and really anchor in my ventral and send you a welcome. I'm looking at you to send you this welcome into this exploration we're going to go on, and see if your nervous system receives that. So my nervous system is looking for cues of safety, and it's interesting to do that when I'm looking at slides and seeing my own image, right? And not hearing from you or seeing you. So I will look forward to hearing from you when we get to the chat. So we are continuously broadcasting and receiving. We are always downloading and uploading information. And our work is to stay tuned into this conversation. So we have to learn how to do that, and then learn how to stay tuned in, turning toward this autonomic conversation that's going on. So when we send cues of safety, we also send an invitation to come into connection. I love that image, that sculpture, two in a bowl, right? Connecting. When we receive cues of safety, we feel an autonomic welcome, and we feel safe to move into connection and to come into co-regulation with another being. Right? Co-regulation. A back and forth, an ebb and flow of being with, right? When we send cues of danger, or when we receive an autonomic warning from another nervous system, when our nervous system takes in that, there's a warning being sent to me, our reactivity increases and our adaptive survival responses are reinforced. So that drive to survive is reinforced when we receive these warnings, autonomic nervous system warnings. I don't have to say anything, no words needed for me to send a cue of danger out into the world. So here we have this beautiful image of what is the social engagement system. And these are 5 cranial nerves that you see coming together in the brainstem. And they control our eyes, ears, voice, face, and head movements. This is your nervous system. This is cranial nerve 10, which is the circuit that's going to the heart in that picture. That's connecting with these facial nerves, these other cranial nerves that allow us to have eye gaze and listen, and our voice to send messages, and our face to move, our head to move. This is the social engagement system. I want you to just take that in for a moment, that beautiful image, all lit up. This is a human being who is ready to come into connection, is sending cues of safety and looking out into the world for cues of safety. We send messages with our eyes, and I'm in the United States where wearing face coverings and face masks has become almost universally required. And it's interesting to see what happens when we wander through the world with a face mask. So all this is covered, right? And yet here is where our nervous system is looking for those cues. It's around the eyes. So yes, the mouth is important to have. It gives other signs. But if you look at someone behind a mask, you can see the smile behind the mask, or you can see the warning behind the mask, because it's coming from the eyes. So I want you just to look for a moment, just take in the eyes and just notice where your nervous system takes you. Does it feel invited to connect or a warning of danger? I'll go back a minute to that one and just leave us there for a moment and just notice what did happen in your nervous system when you saw eyes from other humans, from other mammals. Just notice that, and your brain likely tried to make up a story pretty quickly, but your nervous system was really sending the information to your brain. So then we have our ears, this other part of our social engagement system. I love this quote: the ear collects the spiraling energy from the cosmos. I love that spiral with all those frequencies that make it up. This is what our ears are doing all the time. They're listening for sounds of welcome or cues of danger, right? I'm going to talk just for a moment about SSP, which is Steve Porges's musical auditory intervention. It's 5 hours of music that has been specifically remastered to calm your nervous system and enhance this beautiful social engagement system that we just saw in action. Because listening is dependent on the nervous system. It's dependent on our state, and it influences whether we are feeling safe to connect or in a survival response where we need to disconnect. And listening provides opportunities to exercise these neural circuits, the neural circuits that support both our physical and our mental health. Because our nervous system is the foundation of both of those. Both our physical and our emotional well-being is based in our nervous system's ability to be flexible. So the music in this SSP efficiently conveys cues of safety. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go to their website. And if you decide you want to take the training, there's a code for you. But let's move on to Prosody, which is the music of the voice, right? The music of the voice, the patterns of rhythm and sound, frequency, duration, intensity is what your nervous system is listening to. And it's going to listen to my tone of voice, the intonation of my voice, before it takes in any information that I might be sharing. Because what my prosody is doing is my prosody is sending a message about what is underneath the words. So it reveals the underlying intent of my words. So again, I'm just going to see, is my voice welcoming you into connection? So what we know about voice is that a monotone voice is an automatic autonomic cue of danger. So I'm going to talk in a monotone voice just for a moment and let you see where your nervous system goes. And just notice what happened. Was there a disconnect? Was there a confusion in the nervous system? What happened inside your system? I know what happens inside mine when I speak in a monotone voice, and it feels very restrictive, very confining, and I begin to disconnect from what I'm doing. So interesting for you to notice what happens, right? And then there's also there are tones of voice that can just feel dysregulating to our nervous system. It can have a familiar frequency to something in our past, and we can not understand quite why we are disconnecting, but it can be because of that familiarity of the nervous system from something in the past. So that's prosody. And I love the research around what we call vocal bursts. These are the non-language sounds that we use to communicate. Ah, oh, huh. Right? You get and you know what I'm trying to say by a vocal burst, right? And the research tells us that these non-language ways of connecting are understood across cultures and across species, right? We talk to our cats, dogs, horses, cows in this way, right? And that they're understood with a high degree of accuracy. So when we don't know what to say, we can use a vocal burst because sometimes words are difficult to find. The right word is difficult to find. I know as a clinician, I sometimes struggle to find, I wonder what the right word to say. I know what I want to say. I need to find the right word to communicate that to my client. And I found a vocal burst does that beautifully. The same is true with my friends, the people I live with and love. Sometimes a vocal burst is just the right thing. And you will notice now that you know what vocal bursts are, that as you go through the world, we use them all the time. So begin to tune into those vocal bursts. And finally, we get to head movement, right? And just, notice these interesting creatures who are nodding, turning their heads, tilting their heads. So a straight, unmoving head is an autonomic cue of danger. So if I taught the entire webinar today this way without ever moving my head, I'm going to do that for a moment and just notice what happens. Where is your nervous system taking you as I speak to you, still with prosody, but I'm not moving my head? And then I'm going to invite you for a minute to try that on for size. So try speaking to me, even though I can't hear you. Talk to me for a moment without moving your head and just notice what happens inside. And while you're playing with an unmoving head, now speak to me also in a monotone voice. So monotone voice and unmoving head. And notice what happens. And then keep your head straight. Don't move your head, but add prosody back to your voice and notice what happens. And then finally, let your head move in whatever way it wants. Usually there's a gentle tilt that wants to come in. Sometimes it's a back and forth to shake it out. But just notice what happens now when you have prosody and your head is moving, right? I'm a right side tilter. You can kind of notice for yourself. You can go back to an unmoving head and invite your head to move. And do I tilt left? Do I tilt right? No research on that. I'm just always curious about it to see where people go, right or left. And some people say, oh, I can go either. So here are the elements of the social engagement system that are at work in every moment, sending cues out into the world. Our eyes, our voice, our head turning and tilting. This is the way we send a message out into the world, whether we're saying, ooh, I'm available and ready to connect. I'm a safe presence in the world. Or stay away, I'm warning you, I am not in a place where I can connect right now. So I'm sending that. I'm also looking for that. So that was co-regulation, where I start the first organizing principle. And before we move to neuroception, I just wanted to say that co-regulation is where we begin when we enter the world, right? We need another being to help us. We don't survive without being connected to another human being. Our longing when we come into the world is to be met by a welcoming, regulated energy. That the person whose arms we are in is welcoming. He's sending those cues of safety, right? That doesn't happen for all of us, right? And so if we don't land in a system with a person or people who we can co-regulate with, who send those cues of welcome, who predictably show up for us in that way, then we have to learn to self-regulate before we really should be doing that, right? The trajectory is we co-regulate and then we self-regulate from a place of safety. So if you think about your own world, you think, were there people who I safely could co-regulate with, who I learned how to send and receive cues of safety? Or was my world, filled with people who sent warning? Or were there some of each? Right? Most of us have some of each. And again, we don't need to be in that co-regulating relationship all of the time. The research tells us that about 30% of the time we're in that place of feeling the welcome all the time, right? It's that the other 70% of the time, we are with someone who recognizes there's been a misattunement, what we call a rupture, and they come and they make a repair, they reconnect. They then send a cue of safety. They send an autonomic welcome. All right, so understanding co-regulation and the essential need to be connected with others. And again, that is a lifetime need. But we are wired for connection. We need that connection from the moment we enter the world. Well, before we enter the world, even in the womb, we need that connection. And then until we die, we need that connection. So here, let's go to the second organizing principle, which is neuroception. And this is the way the nervous system takes in information without us being aware of it, without conscious awareness. So as we begin to explore befriending our nervous systems today, one of the things we're doing is we are making the implicit experience that's going on inside our nervous system all the time, and we're bringing it into explicit awareness. So neuroception is this wonderful word that Steve Fortis created to describe the way the nervous system takes in information. Because the only word that came close was perception, right? And perception involves the cortex, involves your brain. And while the nervous system connects with cortex, at its heart, it's a subcortical part of our anatomy, right? It starts in the brainstem and it goes down, and then it connects with the nerves in the face when we saw for the social engagement system. And it does have some projections to cortex prefrontal, but when it's taking in information, it's working below those levels. And so he developed the word neuroception, which I absolutely love. Neuro for nervous system and ception for the way we perceive. So neuroception. And neuroception is responding to cues of safety and danger. And the easiest way to think is inside, outside, between. So it's listening inside your body, it's listening outside in the environment, and it's listening between your system and other systems, so between people. And this is going on micro moment to micro moment. All the time we're alive, neuroception is happening. So I'm going to invite you to take an autonomic adventure for a moment and tune in to your neuroception. So if you can just invite your brain for the next 8-10 slides to take a back seat and let your nervous system sort of take you on a journey first. Your brain's going to come in very quickly to make a story, but let's just start by inviting the nervous system. So just looking at the slides and just noticing welcome or warning, approach or avoid. So we'll take a moment and just notice for yourself, where does your neuroception take you? Where did you go? And some of those slides bring a very varied response in the viewer, right? And I try to put in slides that would bring up different experiences for people. I'll mention the slide of the single teddy bear, and what I get from people when I'm in trainings is it either brings up a well-loved experience and a longing to connect, or an abandoned, forlorn, and a desire to get away from that image. The blue door image brings up a variety of experiences because it can feel inviting of curiosity, inviting of possibility, or it can feel sort of a forewarning of something unpredictable, unexpected, right? And I try to mix them up because what I wanted you to have for an experience was different nervous system approach, avoid, welcome, warn, some neutral even. And in the warning, an experience of mobilizing, get me out of here, or anger, or that immobilizing, disconnecting. And then the experience of feeling, oh, I could just relax in that image. Because that's really what's happening for us every moment of the day. We're taking in information in these ways, and those were just images. Think of what happens when you have all of the sensory information that's coming at you. So the lesson here is that we can tune into what happens in our own nervous system, and that really is our responsibility, to tune in to our own nervous system. And we can't assume what's happening in another nervous system. So if you happen to be watching this with another person with you, you ask them, you might find, oh, they had a very different experience, right? So the invitation when we're looking through the polyvagal lens, through the lens of the nervous system, is to know, oh, here's what happened for me. How did that land in your system? What happened for your nervous system experience, right? And if we really want to stay true to the lens of the nervous system, we use that kind of language. You don't say, well, how did you feel about that? Or what did you think about that? Because again, thinking, feeling is another level up. I want to stay right here at the embodied nervous system experience. Where did that land in your system? And as we map your system a bit later in this webinar, and that's the question we keep going back to. Where did that take you on your map? Right? So that's the experience of neuroception. And here's what happens. We sometimes have what we call a neuroceptive match. And when neuroception, sort of matches what's happening in the world, the nervous system activates the state that brings the energy that's necessary to manage this experience. And sometimes neuroception is one of safety and connection, and that's just right. And it brings us the energy to move forward, engage, connect, communicate, cooperate, collaborate, all those lovely things, right? And sometimes the neuroception is one that it feels a bit unsafe at the moment, or there's something a bit not okay in my environment. And then neuroception is going to activate the state that allows me to take the survival response needed. Sometimes a fight response is exactly the right response. Sometimes an active escape is the right response. And sometimes that disappearing, disconnecting is the right response. So again, it's not always that we simply want to be in this welcome. Sometimes the situation calls for an adaptive survival response. So that's the match. And then we have this mismatch that often happens, right? With a neuroceptive mismatch, we have an inability to calm our defense systems more actually in a safe environment. So it may be concretely safe, but my nervous system may get a neuroception of danger, right? And then it will activate my habitual protective response pattern, right? This hypervigilant, alarmed experience. And you might think about your own experience. Do you wander through the world more often in this hypervigilant, alarmed place? And if so, is it an accurate experience of neuroception? And it's interesting because at this moment in the world, neuroception is taking in cues of danger all over the place. And for many people in many environments and many experiences, that is an accurate neuroception. There are a lot of cues of danger. And sometimes, because we're getting so bombarded by cues of danger, we actually are in a safe environment, but our nervous system can't calm down. The neuroception can't find the cues of safety, right? And we humans have a negativity bias. We're built that way, built for survival, so that our nervous system pays more attention to cues of danger than cues of safety. So an equally intense cue of safety gets less attention from the nervous system than a cue of danger. Just the way we are built, right? Helped us survive. It's still helping us survive, I imagine. But what it means is we often miss the cues of safety that are actually in our environment. So that's one mismatch. The other mismatch is when we can't activate our defense systems when we are actually in a risk environment. So our neuroception doesn't give us the accurate signals of danger, right? And this response is this dulled, unaware, going through the world, not really here in that protective cocoon, right? But it means that I'm at risk because I can't activate my defense systems. I don't get the cues of danger that then would activate my defense. I also think this is a high risk taking folks who just don't get the accurate cues of the intensity of danger there is in that high risk activity they're doing. So again, think about the way you're moving through the world, and perhaps you're more on this, sort of in a protective space, not really taking in the cues. And our systems are overwhelmed at the moment, and staying in that hypervigilant place for such a long time is really challenging and draining. And then we may go to this dulled unaware as a respite from the hypervigilant. And we're going to map this in the second part of the program this morning. But just think about where you are and how you move through these mismatches, right? And then what do we do when there is a mismatch? How do we work with neuroception is really the question, because neuroception is simply a biological experience that is happening in your body. Your nervous system is doing this all the time. We can't work with neuroception directly. We have to bring perception to neuroception. So that's the first step. We bring perception. We turn toward our nervous system and we tune in. We bring our active awareness to it. And then the next step is to bring what I call discernment. We have to move into discernment to decide, is what my neuroception is giving me needed, right? So the question I use is, in this moment, in this place, with this person or these people, is this response needed? Right? So that's really the question, because it's going to take in those cues of safety and danger, right? It brings us into the present moment and the environment we're in and the people or the person we're in connection with. And then it asks the question, is this response or this intensity of response needed? Right? And remember, it doesn't ask, is it appropriate? Because the autonomic nervous system doesn't work that way. It doesn't work with moral meaning or motivation. It simply works with survival, right? We humans add the story. That's the brain adding the story about motivation or meaning, and oftentimes moral meaning around people's behaviors and their responses. You think about that, that's what happens about, our own responses. If we are in a response, we begin to have this, make meaning of it, right? And judge it, and self-criticism. And that's your brain, not your nervous system. Your nervous system is simply responding. So the question is, in this moment, in this place, with this person or these people, is this response needed? So I'm going to invite you to think of a time recently when you had a response that felt somewhat out of balance to the situation, right? And that's the cue we're looking for. If something feels a bit too much or not enough for the situation, there's an imbalance between my nervous system response and what's going on, then I want to look at this through this question of discernment, right? Because what happens is some familiar cue from our past has come alive in the present and has brought this intensity of response. If we think about trauma for a moment, this is how trauma activates in the moment, right? There's a familiar flavor of something, and our nervous system feels that, senses that tiny flavor of a past traumatic neuroceptive experience. And then it lights up in the present moment. So discernment is one way to begin to turn towards that and think, is this a trauma story that has come to life because something, either inside my body, in the environment around me, or between me and another nervous system has come alive. So this guiding question that we use is, in this moment, does your neuroception sense me as a restorative resource or a threat? Right? That's the question we're asking whenever we're with another human being. When we're working as therapists, when we're working as clinicians or any kind of helping professional, this is the question we are asking. Am I sending the cues of safety out into the world to this other human being that they need so that they sense me as a restorative resource? Or have I moved into the category of threat? And again, I always intend to show up as a restorative resource. And I can feel it when I'm in that connection with another person. And I can feel it when I have moved out of that place and have become no longer a friend, but now a foe. I'm no longer a resource. I'm now a challenge or a threat. And then my work is to bring explicit awareness to that and ask the question, so what just happened? Right? If, boy, it felt in my nervous system like we just disconnected for a moment, I wonder what happened. What were the cues of danger that came in? So I'm going to invite you for a moment to do this simple practice with me. And we're going to start with it. I'm going to ask you just to identify one cue of safety, one cue of danger. It may be easy to identify more, but let's just start with one and then see where we go. So we're going to start with the inside. So at this moment, inside your body, can you identify one cue of safety and one cue of danger? Inside your body, just listening in. What's a cue of safety and what's a cue of danger? And then I'm going to invite us to move into the environment. So at this moment, in the environment just around you, your immediate environment, can you identify one cue of safety and one cue of danger? And then we're going to expand the environment out from your immediate environment, one step out, whatever that is for you, whether it's outside the room you're in, outside the building you're in, out into your community or neighborhood, one step out. And what's a cue of safety and a cue of danger? And then let's take the global step out and step out into your country or even the global connection. What's one cue of safety and one cue of danger in that large space, that large environment? All right, and then let's work our way back here to this environment. And let's come into the sense of a cue of safety and a cue of danger in your connection with others. It may be in your connection with me, one cue of safety, one cue of danger. It may be in your connection with someone else in the space you're in right now, in your Sunday space. You can just think of someone in your world and just think, what's the cue of safety? Nervous system to nervous system in that connection, and what's a cue of danger? So you're beginning to get to tune into your nervous system through neuroception. And then this is the guiding question we're asking all the time. Am I being perceived as a resource or a threat? Am I sending out cues of welcome or signals of warning? All right, we will stop there for a moment, and we've got just a couple of minutes before we take our break, and I just want to settle in for a moment. We took a whirlwind tour through the first two organizing principles of polyvagal theory, of co-regulation, this biological imperative to be in connection with another safe, regulating person, and then neuroception. And if we put those together, we understand that neuroception is driving our connection, right? So if I'm putting a sign of welcome, if I'm sending neuroceptive cues of safety out into the world and you're receiving those, then we can come into safe co-regulation, right? So these two weave together beautifully and form the foundation for relationship, right? And as we go into the next module, we're going to begin to map our system and understand how we can know, where am I in a cue of safety or a cue of danger. But right now, we're just going to stop for a moment and just notice, right? Where are you? Are you feeling connected? Or are you feeling some flavor of danger? And again, this work is to tune into your nervous system and then let your nervous system inform the story your brain is creating. All right. So we are going to dive into the hierarchy, the autonomic hierarchy next. And so I'm going to wait and do that as we come back from your 5-minute break to do whatever you need to do to be able to come back and dive in from a place of feeling welcomed and ready to learn about the autonomic hierarchy. Look through the chat while I was having my 5-minute break, and I will respond to the one question that felt important at this moment to respond to around co-regulation and connection with people for whom people have been dangerous, right? People who are suffering from complex trauma. And what I will say is oftentimes pets are one of the first places of co-regulation because it's another mammalian system. Our dogs, our cats, our horses, a way to co-regulate. We also co-regulate in nature, which is an interesting experience, not with a nervous system, but with the natural world. So yes, and when I'm working with clients, I am that missing experience for them. I am the safe co-regulating energy that connects with them, and they can dip into that connection. And it really often is a dipping in, just a little dip in and feeling and back and dipping in and feeling and come back. So it is a biological imperative. And as you know, therapists, trauma therapists, or people living with people who are suffering from complex trauma, we are the regulating energy, the regulating system that offers that, what Bruce Ecker would call a disconfirming experience to them. You know, Steve would call it a different, challenging their neural expectation, because their neural expectation is, their nervous system expectation is that people are not safe to co-regulate with. So we're offering a different neural expectation for them to begin to take in. And then I also noticed the adverse childhood experiences. The ACEs were referenced in the chat, and ACEs are, I think, being used pretty regularly in many places now. I know primary care physicians are using as a screening tool. And what I want us to think about through the lens of the nervous system, through the lens of polyvagal theory, is that ACEs is step one, but we need to put step two in to then use the ACEs in a way that's helpful to direct our understanding, because step two is not what happened, but what was your nervous system's response to what happened, right? So when you're using ACE, yes, there's a ton of evidence that links a certain number of ACEs to certain physical and mental health experiences. And you really want to look at, so you had these three ACEs. What was your nervous system response? Because it can be that someone has, one ACE, their score is 1 or 2, and they are incredibly compromised. They struggle in their daily living. And another person may have 3 or 4 and be very regulated and move through the world from that place of flexibility. It's the nervous system response. So let's go on now to this evolutionary timeline. Let's get to know the nervous system in the 3 states. So here are these 3 distinct pathways, each working in service of survival. And we want to remember that term, in service of survival, right? No matter what state I'm in, my nervous system has enacted that response to assure my survival. So about 500 million years ago, the dorsal vagal system emerged, right? In our phylogenetic history, not in our, wasn't one of our mammalian ancestors, but in our phylogenetic history, 500 million years ago, this first part of the parasympathetic nervous system emerged. And it helps us in nowadays immobilize and disconnect, right? So back then, this was the system, if you think about an ancient tortoise, which also was not the 500 million year ago creature that we're talking about, this was actually some sort of a boneless fish. But if you think about the ancient tortoise, it sort of wanders its way slowly through the world, right? This is your dorsal vagal system, wandering slowly through the world. And when you get a neuroception of life threat, go into your shell, become invisible, become immobile, right? That's dorsal. And then about 400 million years ago, the sympathetic nervous system came into being, right? This was actually in another kind of fish, right? And because evolution is so incredibly creative, we don't throw out dorsal. We simply build sympathetic on top of it. And sympathetic is a system of mobilization, right? It's known as fight and flight. We want to call it mobilization because it brings us this energy to do all sorts of things that are wonderful and needed. And in a survival response, it brings us the fight and flight energy. And then about 200 million years ago, as you see this other part of the parasympathetic nervous system, ventral vagal, came into being, built on top of sympathetic and dorsal. And this is the part that makes us uniquely human, right? We can be safe and social, we can connect, communicate. And when we think about connection through this branch of our nervous system, we think about those 4 streams of connection. We think about connect to self, or, as you're going to learn in the IFS presentation, connect to selves, all of the parts inside of me. Connect to other, connect to the world around us, and connect to spirit. That is what this ventral vagal experience brings us. All right, so let's put that on the hierarchy, because that timeline, the order in which those systems came into being, create this hierarchy of response. And polyvagal theory lets us know that we respond in this particular order. And because of that predictability, it makes it a lovely way to navigate our own paths through the world and to help our clients understand where they are and what has to happen to come home to ventral. And I call ventral our home because I believe that our nervous systems inherently know how to get there and long to be there. And those pathways may have been covered up through experience, but they're there. And our job is to uncover and keep traveling those pathways so that they get well worn, and those pathways of connection begin to be the ones we travel more often than our pathways of protection. So here we are. The ventral is the top of the hierarchy, a system of safety and connection, whereas Steve says we have access to health, growth, and restoration, those three lovely experiences. Down one level of the hierarchy is sympathetic, a system of mobilization where our protection is through action, some kind of action. And then bottom of the hierarchy, dorsal, a system of immobilization where our protection is through disappearing. So we'll just take a brief tour through these systems. This is the vagus. The parasympathetic is mainly made up of the vagus nerve. And there's that lovely image. It's an old ancient wood carving of the vagus, not anatomically correct exactly, but beautiful, right? You get the feeling of the wandering aspect of this nerve. And so from the brain stem at the base of your head, in your medulla, that's where this starts. And then it travels down through your lungs, your heart, your diaphragm, your stomach. And then, as we saw, it connects upward to form the social engagement system with the nerves in the neck, throat, eyes, and ears. So it actually forms a biological face-heart connection. And if we think about how the ventral and the dorsal aspects of the vagus are divided, the division happens mainly at the diaphragm. And so from the diaphragm up, supra-diaphragmatic, is ventral. And this is where our nervous system helps us come into healthy homeostasis. Safe, engaged, connect, communicate. And from the diaphragm down, subdiaphragmatic, is dorsal. And when dorsal is doing its everyday, normal, non-reactive role, it has healthy regulation of our digestive system. That's what it does. So as long as it's just doing its everyday function, it's helping our digestion work beautifully. It's when it's called on, when it's enlisted as a survival response, that we move out of awareness, out of connection, into collapse. Right? Our digestion is impacted, certainly, and we have this sense of no longer being here. Sympathetic nervous system is a spinal nervous system. So whereas the parasympathetic is cranial nerves coming out of the base of your skull, sympathetic nervous system is spinal nervous system, comes out of the middle part of your spinal cord, or the sympathetic chain that runs down next to your spinal cord, thoracic and lumbar regions, right? So if you just for a moment reach one hand gently down from your back and the other hand gently up from your waist in the back, between your two hands is pretty much the territory of where sympathetic exits, thoracic and lumbar. And its job, everyday non-reactive role, is to regulate breath and heart rhythms. You know, it helps pump blood. It has this mobilizing energy so that we can move through the world in all sorts of ways. Right? That's its regular role. We need sympathetic energy. That's why we call it the mobilization system. And when it's enlisted for an adaptive survival response, it brings us that energy of fight and flight. Right? So what do we do with that? And here's how I envision this, and here's what we're going to work with now so that you can begin to befriend your own nervous system. We put those three states on the autonomic ladder, right? Ventral is at the top, and you can see the ventral figure there is delighted with the world, right? Can see all sorts of things, safely anchored up there at the top of the ladder. Neuroception is one of safety, social, engaged, connected through those four streams of connection. Sympathetic, we move down to the middle of the ladder. And you can see the fight and flight that happens there. Neuroception is one of danger, mobilized, action taking. And then this little person at the bottom of the ladder in dorsal, the neuroception is one of life threat. Right? Remember, neuroception is simply the way nervous system is taking in. And so we call it a neuroception of life threat because it's overwhelming. Whereas the neuroception of danger and sympathetic gives us action taking, doing, this overwhelming cue of danger, which we call life threat. We now go into shutdown or collapse. We're immobile. Okay, so here's the autonomic ladder. So let's think, what are the emergent properties that come from each of these states? So from a state of protection, either sympathetic mobilization or dorsal disconnection, survival is the only goal. And while most things in the nervous system in our body, even in the way we do therapy, most things are both and experiences, this is an either or. So when we go into one of these protective states, adaptive survival responses close our system to connection and to change. So we can no longer connect and no longer engage in the change process. It's only from a state of connection that we can be in this process of change. Health, growth, and restoration. Social engagement can happen only when we're in a state of connection. So when we move out of connection into protection, we also leave social engagement. So here are the emergent properties of ventral. And emergent properties are those properties that are supported, resourced, nourished by a state. Okay? So what is nourished, possible from ventral is this: we can co-regulate and self-regulate. Right? We connect to self, others, the world, and spirit. You can see this really is a place of both and. Ventral is a place of both and. We tune into the moment and tune out distractions. We're both resourced in our own being and resourceful in the ways we move through the world. We can reach out for support and we can offer support. We have both compassion and self-compassion. We explore options. This is where hope lives, in a ventral vagal state. We are flexible. We're resilient in this place. And the stories that happen here have a flavor of possibility. Okay? So that's ventral, top of the hierarchy. Take in all those emergent properties. And when we move to sympathetic, all of those properties that were supported from ventral are no longer available to us. And instead, we're here. We have a sense of unease, impending danger. We're now mobilized for fight and flight, active aggression or active escape. We're alarmed. We're hypervigilant. And let's think for a moment about alarmed, because alarmed is an interesting experience. And there is a subtle difference between being alarmed and being alert. Alert is an emergent property of ventral. Right? Alert is I can pay attention to everything that's going on around me and be here present doing it. Alarmed is when I've gone to sympathetic. I'm now in an adaptive survival response. And when I leave ventral to go to sympathetic or dorsal, my prefrontal cortex does not come along for the ride. So my prefrontal is now no longer with me, helping me the way it does when I'm alert. So here we're alarmed. We're looking and listening for danger. And we miss and misread signs of safety. Right? There's this sense of separation that happens here where we move from connection to being cut off from others. And in fact, where in ventral I want to be connected to the world and to people, in sympathetic, people now become dangerous. Right? So we disconnect from self, others, the world, and spirit. And we enter into a story that the world is unsafe and the people in it are dangerous to me. Okay, here are the properties of sympathetic. This is what is available to us when our biology has taken us into this state. So now let's go to dorsal, the bottom of the ladder, the earliest state, this early survival state where our body enters conservation mode. Everything slows down. Digestion stops. Heart rate slows. Breath changes. The blood flow and the oxygenation of blood to our brain changes, so our state becomes one that is numb, foggy, a flavor of dissociation. right? Dorsal is actually the doorway to dissociation. We're collapsed. We're disconnected from everything. We're disconnected from others, from the world, and from ourselves. My clients describe it to me as this sense of feeling untethered and floating. Right? We're alone, lost, abandoned, unreachable. They tell me that it feels like I'm lost, alone in a place where no one will ever find me. I get that over and over with my clients. Hopeless. We disappear, right? Some flavor of disappearing. And it simply may be that I've taken that step back. I'm not quite so present here. I'm going through the motions, but I'm not really here, or I'm going through the motions without the energy to care, right? Safety and hope feel unreachable because if you think about it, I have to climb all the way up to the top of that ladder, right? In order to reach safety, in order to find hope again. So the flavors of story that come here are stories of despair, right? And I like the ladder because as we're going to see when we map, there are all sorts of flavors of these states, which is why the rungs on the ladder, we go from rung to run and feel the different flavors. But there's some flavor of giving up, despair, can't, that happens here in dorsal. So this is an image. I encourage people to do art creations of their states. And this was a pastel of a colleague's dorsal experience. And I'll just let you take it in for a minute. You can feel that dorsal experience, perhaps. I think it's a beautiful representation. I also love it because she said, please use it. You are welcome to use it, but please don't use my name, which to me is that dorsal experience, right? That's the dorsal experience. I'm unseen. Don't see me. And here, this is my thought about sympathetic. It's the power, the unleashed, uncontrollable power of this wave. That's what it feels like to me. And then here is a lovely creation of a ventral experience. One of my students created this. It's made up all out of natural materials. I'll just let you take that in for a minute. It's just really lovely. You can feel the ventral in my system. You see how it lands in your system. So now, having this basic understanding of these three states, and the three discrete states at the moment is where we start, because when we begin to befriend, we want to know, what does ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal feel like? Well, how it happens for me in my system. So you have this handout, you have this map. This is the personal profile map. And I'm going to invite you to get it out. I'm going to take you through it so that you begin to get to know your nervous system. That beginning introduction in this particular way. And if you don't have the map printed with you, just get a piece of paper. It would be great, divided into thirds. You can draw a ladder on the left. So we're going to start in sympathetic, and then we're going to go to dorsal, and then we're going to end in ventral. Because one of the only rules really around doing this kind of exploration, doing any kind of polyvagal approach to therapy, is whatever we do, we always want to bring the system into a ventral experience to end. So my motto is always end in ventral. So even in this mapping today, we're going to do that. And you'll feel your system begin to come alive in these states as we do it. So we're going to start in sympathetic. And I'm going to invite you to first connect with your sympathetic nervous system and ask your sympathetic nervous system, if you were going to do this mapping color, what color would it want you to use for sympathetic? And again, your brain might say one thing immediately, but check in. Just check in with your body, move down from your brain and see what color the sympathetic nervous system want to be. And just write that color in the margin of your map. When I do this with clients, I usually have markers. And nowadays, because nobody's together, I invite clients to have markers. But this morning, we'll just mark it in the margin. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to think of a time recently and that you felt some of that sympathetic mobilization. Right? This is not the energy that allows you to show up and move through your day with passion and joy and energy. This is the survival energy. The neuroception is one of danger, and it's taken you to a place of feeling endangered, and fight or flight is coming up for you. Overwhelming, too much energy flooding your system. And bring just enough of that into your mind and body so you get a flavor of it. And then begin to write in the middle portion of your map what's happening in your body. What are some of your things you're thinking? What are some of the things you do, and what are some of the things you feel? So behavior, feelings, body, beliefs. And just write in that middle part of your map in the sympathetic section. And I would invite you to write whatever you hear from your nervous system. Don't edit what you put on your map. You know, in the beginning, we want to really listen to what the messages are we're getting. And you might think about sleep. How has your sleep changed? How's your relationship with food impacted here in sympathetic? And how is any use of substances or behaviors, compulsive or addictive behaviors, impacted here? And we want to really broaden that category to be anything that is, pulls you in that way. Recently, it's been Netflix binging for me, so that's a sympathetically charged. Just need the next episode. Right? It's that quality of being driven that happens here in sympathetic. So just take another moment and let your system help you fill out this middle part. And then I'm going to invite you to fill in 2 sentences from this sympathetically mobilized survival state. Any kind of sigh. It can be a sigh of frustration that interrupts. It can be a sigh of relief or a sigh of contentment. In Dorsal, we have a sigh of despair. The research on sighing tells us that a sigh is a resetter of the system, both of our psychology and our nervous system. So just a brief sigh can interrupt and help us find a moment, an anchor, back to ventral for a moment. Because now we're going to dive to dorsal together, okay? Let's go to dorsal. And in dorsal, we just want to dip a toe in, because dorsal can be very powerful in its pull. So we want to go to dorsal, the bottom part of the map, bottom of the ladder, and first ask your nervous system, what color is dorsal? What color? And now that you have your color, we're just going to dip a toe into that experience of feeling not enough energy in your system to run your system. A sense of disconnect, a flavor of shutdown or numbing, not care, going through the motions. When you begin to feel that in your mind and body just enough, begin to write in the bottom part of your map, what happens here? What happens in your body? What do you think? What do you feel? What do you do? And again, while you're here, think about sleep. Think about your relationship with food. And think about your use of substances or behaviors. How do they change here in dorsal? And then we are going to do those same two sentences here in dorsal from this place of untethered, floating a bit. Not here. The world is and I am. Just fill in those two sentences. The world is and I am. Give you another minute to fill in some dorsal information. This map is an information gathering experience. All right, so now remember we have to find our way from dorsal through sympathetic to ventral. And the experience of moving up the ladder through sympathetic is one of not mobilized fight and flight, but this is where we just use some of that energy, some of the mobilizing energy, but not fight and flight. So we need to organize the energy. We need to contain it in some way. So I'm going to invite us to just have a bit of a stretch. As you stretch and use your extensors, you bring a little ventral. And then we used to touch fingers for the people next to us, but we can have a self-touch, right? To begin to bring a bit of that ventral. And then again, a breath and a long exhalation brings ventral. And then let's connect through our social engagement systems. I will send a welcoming smile to you. My eyes are welcoming you. Let's find our way back to ventral. And now, from this place in ventral, where we're back here, present in our world, ask your ventral system, what color is this? What color would you use to create this top part of your map? All right, and so we're going to do the same here, except for ventral. We're going to bring it fully alive in our system. So what I'd like you to do is just think of a time when you felt that sense of ventral. And ventral, there are so many flavors of ventral. It can be a true passionate joy, enjoyment of this moment in time. It can be a very quiet, at ease, relaxed moment. It can simply be I have enough safety to move through the world feeling okay, right? I get that from my clients a lot. Oh, yeah, it's okay. I'm okay enough, right? This is the safe enough place. The neuroception here is one of safety. So find a moment that brings that alive for you. And when you do, let it really fill you, right? Whereas in sympathetic or dorsal, we just dipped a toe. In ventral, we want to really let it fill you. Feel your system filling with this energy of regulation, this energy of connection. And when you feel filled, begin to write in the top part of your map, what happens here? What happens in your body? What do you think? What do you feel? What do you do here? And the lovely thing about doing the ventral portion of the map is you only need a micro moment of ventral to map it. So it's not this long, extended experience of being anchored here that we need. And recently that's been difficult to come by for many of us, but a micro moment brings it alive. Your nervous system knows this place. And again, here, what happens with your sleep, with your relationship with food and any use of substances or behaviors. How does it change here in ventral? And those two sentences, I am and the world is, fill them in from ventral. How does ventral inform those sentences? The world is and I am. So this is a map you can return to as you get more information. But for this moment, I'm going to invite you to now turn towards those rectangular boxes running down the right-hand side. And again, if you're making your own map, you can just write in 3 boxes on the right-hand side. These are for you to name your state in the way your state would like to be recognized. Ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal are the biological, scientific names, and I think it's important for us to know those. And I know that for many people, ventral, sympathetic, dorsal are not the user-friendly labels, are not the ways their states want to be known. So again, in those boxes on the right-hand side, just invite your states to share with you how they want to be called. The other day it was a weather theme, so it was sunny, stormy, foggy. Someone was using energy. It was calm, chaotic, confused. So whatever works for your system, and this really is a honoring how your nervous system is saying this is what I'd like to be called. All right. So as we're going to kind of look at this map in total, one of the ways to start and get the real flavor of your 3 states is to look at those 3 sentences. I am and the world is in each of the 3 places, and just notice how different you feel about yourself and the world when you're in ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal. Just really feel what happens, because that's your brain's story that changes so dramatically as you change state. And here's a composite map of many of the people I've worked with. And if we look in dorsal, I am unlovable, invisible, lost, and alone. And the world is cold, empty, uninhabitable. And your I am and the world is statements are, have some flavor of this hopeless, helpless, disconnect, floating. And then if we move up to sympathetic, I am crazy, toxic. The world is unfriendly, scary, exploding. And your sentences have some flavor of this sense of being, there's too much, overwhelming, out of control, it's chaotic. We're in that anger or anxiety place. We're confrontational. We're ready to run, right? And then finally coming up to the top of the hierarchy in ventral. I am okay. That's the one I hear often from my clients. It's simply, I am okay, right? That's great. That's that anchor in ventral. I am okay. The world is welcoming, filled with opportunity. Some flavor of that, right? Curiosity is an emergent property of ventral, and I love, that's what I look for most often with my clients, is a bit of curiosity when they go, huh, and there's that vocal burst, that lets me know, ooh, there's a bit of curiosity. A bit of ventral just came into their system, right? And then there are lots of flavors of ventral, so you can be passionate or at ease, right? You can be, playful, joyful, mobilized in that wonderfully energetic way, or quiet, calm. Okay. So look at your map and just notice, how you fit on any of these. Okay. So this is what we do with the map now, is this notice and name practice. So I'm going to invite you right now to notice, where are you on your map right now? And name the state, either the name that your state told you, or ventral, sympathetic, dorsal. Name the state. And then turn toward that experience for just a moment with a bit of curiosity. Just for a moment, and listen to what the state wants you to know just for a moment. And now come on back. And we want it to be that quick, simple a practice in the beginning, because what happens when we turn toward and bring a bit of curiosity, again, curiosity is a ventral experience. So we're bringing a bit of ventral, turning toward an experience that might be sympathetic or dorsal, to listen for just a moment to the story the state wants us to know. And we do it just for 10, 15, 20 seconds and come back. And it's the coming back that is the essential experience. Because what happens for many of us, and certainly for our trauma survivor clients, is when they listen to a state or get pulled to the energy of that state, they get pulled in and stuck there, right? So the experience of flexibility or well-being is not that we're always in ventral. It's that we can find our way back to ventral. So if we look at this lovely art map by my colleague David Keyville, we're not always in the top canopy there, in the ventral canopy of the tree. We move to the sympathetic limbs and then underground to the dorsal, but we can find our way back. And then this comic strip, this is this experience of ventral through sympathetic to dorsal. Trees are often the way people represent their states, their hierarchy when they do an art map, and I'd encourage you all to create an art map. It's a beautiful way of getting to know your nervous system differently from the ladder map. The ladder map is a more left hemisphere biased experience. This is a more right hemisphere biased experience. But you can see the sympathetic in the middle, the dorsal underground, and finally ending in ventral. And then this one, I love the dorsal unplugged, right? Isn't that the perfect experience of dorsal unplugged? Moving up through sympathetic where there's alarm going on, right? And then up to ventral. So what we know is that without a ventral vagal anchor, without a system that can't use the regulating influence of our ventral vagus, we have health challenges, our relationships are in distress, and we suffer in our daily experience. So what I'd like to do as we're getting ready to end is do this ventral vagal anchor practice. So we're going to identify the predictable who, what, where, and when of your ventral system. Okay, so again, if you have paper and can write on it, it's a lovely way to begin to identify and remember your anchors. Let's start with who. So who is a person in your world who, when you are around them or when you think about them, your ventral system feels welcome? You feel that welcome. You feel safe to engage. Who is a person? And again, for many people for whom people have been dangerous, the who may be a pet in the beginning. As a clinician, I take the responsibility to show up as a who for my client, and I'm very willing to be their who as we're creating more regulation. So find a who for your system. And after we get good at a who, the who can be a spiritual being. The who can be someone who was alive, is no longer alive, but still brings you that sense of welcome. Can be someone who you don't know, but also brings you that welcome. But as a first starting place, I'd like you to find a who that is a living, breathing nervous system that you can connect with. So then we'll move to what. What is some simple practice you can do, some simple thing you can do that when you do it predictably gives you a micro moment of ventral, predictably feels safe and welcoming. And again, this is not a large practice. This is a tiny moment. So for me, I live in Maine, and my back windows look out onto woods. And so a what for me is to simply look out the back window. And as I do it right now, we have a beautiful, it's morning, beautiful blue sky. I'm seeing the tops of trees, and the trees are blowing because it's windy out. So that's a what for me, a ventral vagal anchor what for me. So what is something you do? Short, little something you can predictably do. So then let's move to where. Where is a place in your world where when you are there, or remember being there if you can no longer go there at the moment, brings you that ventral vagal sense of, oh, yes, safe, welcomed. Where is a place? Again, I live near the ocean, and so my where is by the ocean. And up until recently, I've been unable to go to my where because my ocean, my particular stretch of ocean, has been closed to people. So, but now I can go back to my where. My nervous system is very happy about that. So, where is a where for you? And then finally, a when. When is a time? Time of day of the week, time of year, time when something happens, when you feel that predictable anchoring in ventral. I tell people I'm a morning person, an early morning person, so that is a when for me. That getting up first thing before the world wakes up and I'm by myself in this moment, it's a ventral when, an anchoring when for me. So again, if you found one who, one what, one where, and one when, that's a great starting point. This is what I do with my clients. We do this together and we find one of each. And then you create a practice of turning to these when you notice that you're either not anchored in ventral or you're moving out of ventral. So that comes back to the question, where are you on your map? And if, oh, I'm not in ventral, I can grab an anchor to help me return there. Or if I notice, oh, I'm on the verge of leaving ventral, grab an anchor, right? We can also use these to deepen our capacity to be in ventral, right? I can bring my who to mind, and I can just simply be with that experience for a bit of time, and deepens that connection. So ventral vagal anchors are a lovely way to start to resource your nervous system, right? To help you have more capacity to come back to ventral. Because remember, we are not unhealthy, either physically or psychologically unhealthy simply because we leave ventral. It's when we leave and get stuck in one of those adaptive survival states that we suffer. So flexibility of being able to come back, of finding our way back home to ventral, is really makes for a resilient system. So a flexible system is a resilient system. A resilient system is one that's filled with flexibility. So these anchors are a way for us to do that. Right? When we're in the rigid and stuck end of this continuum, there are more cues of danger than cues of safety. Right? And the safety danger equation is the easiest way I think of to think about it. When there are more cues of safety than danger, we're ready for connection, new stories emerge, change is possible, and we experience both physical and psychological well-being. More cues of safety than danger, we can anchor in ventral, right? More cues of danger than safety, the opposite happens. A survival response activates either sympathetic or dorsal. And we get stuck in the story that comes from that state. Our system is closed to change, and we suffer from physical disease and psychological dis-ease, right? So through the lens of the nervous system, this is the equation we're working with. And we need to rebalance this equation to be able to come back into ventral. And I do it simply by, I usually put it on a piece of paper with my clients, right? We look for cues of safety and danger in the categories of embodied, environmental, and relational. And the cues of safety have to outweigh the cues of danger, right? And it's important for us to look for both cues of safety and cues of danger, because remember, it's a both and, right? We need to reduce or resolve cues of danger and actively experience cues of safety to change that equation. So we create a story of safety by listening to our nervous system. Safety is not a cognitive experience. Safety is an embodied one, right? And we create this story of safety by connecting with our autonomic nervous system, by listening there. So I'm going to leave you with this, with benevolence. Benevolence is the active, ongoing, intentional use of ventral vagal energy in service of healing. Right? This is what we do with our anchor and ventral. We can then use it in service of healing our own and others. I'm just going to take you through this benevolence meditation, and then we'll transition into Q&A. But join me here for a moment. Close your eyes or simply soften your gaze. Find the place inside your body where you sense the stirring of ventral vagal energy. This may be your heart, your chest, your face, behind your eyes, or somewhere else unique to your system. Feel the place where your energy of kindness is born, and settle into that space for just a moment. Join in the flow of ventral vagal energy as it moves throughout your body. Maybe there's a sense of warmth spreading. Perhaps your heart feels as if it's expanding, or your chest feels full. There might be a tingling in your eyes or a tightness in your throat. Take a moment to get to know your own personal experience of this ventral vagal flow. Stop and savor this state. And now imagine actively using this energy in the service of healing. Feel the power of this state to hold another person, another system in care and compassion. Visualize the many ways you can actively use this state to shape the world. Maybe you're holding a loved one in your stream of ventral vagal energy to ease their suffering. Or perhaps you're the person with an enlivened ventral vagal system in the midst of dysregulation. Take a moment to recognize the people in your life and the places in your world that are in need of your ventral vagal presence. Imagine moving into those connections from your state of ventral vagal abundance. Through the active, ongoing, intentional offering of ventral vagal energy, you are a beacon of kindness, generosity, goodness, compassion, friendship, and common humanity. Create an intention to beam benevolence. So now we can make our transition to question and answer. If you bring your questions, I would love to connect and have some time to answer your questions. Hi.
Hey, Deb.
Oh, it's nice to see your face. My system is going, oh, here's a person that I can connect with.
So that was a really interesting talk, Deb. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So we've collected some of the questions from the participants that we just like to ask you now, okay?
Beautiful.
So the first one is from Dana, and Dana has asked, what are the typical safety cues that somebody should transmit to somebody else?
So the cues that we are sending through our nervous system are these cues of, okay, I have to be regulated. So I have to be in my ventral in order to be a cue of safety for anybody in the world. Mm-hmm. So my responsibility is to know my system, to know how to come home to ventral. And then as I am in ventral, I am then sending that energy out into the world. And I can send it through my eyes. I can make sure that my eyes are welcoming. I can send it through my voice. I can send it through gentle movements, right? There are all these ways. And then when we're working specifically with another person, we get to know what are the cues of safety that your nervous system takes in. So, as we came back into connection, cues of safety you're sending to me are this lovely smile on your face, right? That was a cue of safety. And the fact that there was a voice, right? And then if you listen in your nervous system, what are the cues of safety that you get from my system?
Well, it's things like your tone of voice and your movements and your body language as well, I suppose.
Right, right. And so these are all the ways we're sending, and we can only send. Like if I was sympathetically anxious and I was in that survival state, I couldn't send you cues of safety because I'm dysregulated. So our responsibility is to be regulated and then offer that regulation to the people around us.
Fantastic. Okay, so the next question is from Alexandra. And Alexandra has asked, since traumatized people don't tend to be focused on sending out cues of safety to others and may not be able to, what is to be done if there's no one in their environment who is willing or able to help them co-regulate?
I know, and that is often a struggle that we find with our clients, especially our trauma survivor clients. And so many of them are alone and have people, they'll have regulated beings around them. So again, we are that regulated being for the amount of time we're with them. And I will say that for many clients, coming into a co-regulating safe relationship is unfamiliar and is experienced in the beginning as a cue of danger, right? So if you were not used to being held in a co-regulating safe relationship, you would come there for a moment. I had a client would do this and I'd say, oh, I think we just ended in Ventral together. And she'd say, uh-huh. And it's too weird. I can't stay here. I know. So we just dip in and say, of course you can't. Your nervous system doesn't know this experience. And it's our job to keep introducing it to this moment of safe co-regulation. We would do that over and over. And, I use a lot of humor in my work. And so I would often say, oh, I think we're there again. And sooner or later, she would say, oh, I think we're there, in a oh way, but yes. And so in the beginning, you really are that person for your client. We are that person for people in our lives, right, who don't have other co-regulating safe, nervous systems to be in contact with. This is often why many of my clients have a pet, because a pet can be that co-regulating mammalian nervous system. Your pet lizard doesn't really count, right? But your dog or cat, yes, because they bring you that co-regulating connection. So what I would say to Alexandria is, in the beginning, we're very patient and we're looking for micro moments, and we're bringing them into explicit awareness. And even doing that can be a cue of danger. So we're counting on the connection, the therapeutic connection we have to do that. And then we're beginning, as our client's nervous system begins to reshape a bit, they begin to look out into the world and look for other nervous systems that feel safe to be around in a new way. And so oftentimes I'm encouraging that and saying, so tell me, did you run into another nervous system that felt different and felt interesting to you? And that's really where I go, different and interesting, not better or safer, but different and interesting is usually where I start.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So the next one here is from Jan, and Jan has asked, how about the attraction of danger sometimes to some people? For example, in romantic or sexual connections, like in these cases, danger, not safety, attracts connection. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let's talk for a minute about this concept that I didn't put in today's session because it is so complicated, and yet it speaks to this, which is this one circuit. It's a ventral circuit called the vagal brake. And the vagal brake is a circuit that runs from your medulla to your sinoatrial node of your heart, which is the heart's pacemaker. Okay. And its job is to allow in sympathetic mobilizing energy, but keep us out of fight and flight. Okay. Because if we go to fight and flight, remember, prefrontal doesn't go, and all those emergent properties are now lost to us. What I think happens for, in sexual relationships, romantic relationships, in adventures we go on, and all of these things, our vagal brake is releasing so that we're feeling a lot of that sympathetic, excited, mobilizing, passionate energy. But we're still under the umbrella of ventral. So we're not in a survival response, because then we can take it in and enjoy it and use it and experience it from being there doing it. And, it's interesting because I do think that in a sexual experience, all three states have to be working, and they have to be working in a relationship. What I would say is, as long as the states are in a relationship, which means that there's enough ventral, I would think of ventral as the umbrella, and sympathetic and dorsal are safely under the umbrella. As long as you have that umbrella, your states are all communicating and cooperating, and that brings the richness to experience. And to a sexual experience, you need that. You need all three states. It's when the umbrella closes or blows away, right? When ventral's no longer there, and we're simply in a sympathetically fueled experience, that then I think it does. I think the flavor of danger overwhelms and it becomes dangerous rather than the danger that is excitement. There's a line there. There's a continuum there. And, I think we all have a different need for that sympathetic flavor of danger, depending on how our states are, how we were organized growing up. Right. I think for someone, so let's talk about this for a minute. We all have a home in ventral, right? That's where we all know how to belong to be. Our nervous system wants to be home in ventral. And then we all have a home away from home, right? And when we did our map, so I'll invite the participants today to look at your map and think, where's your home away from home? Is it sympathetic or dorsal? Which is your home from home? Which would be the place that you find yourself more frequently is more familiar. So my home away from home is dorsal. And I joke, I say that even though I know we go down the ladder, I say I take the express elevator. I do not spend a lot of time in sympathetic. So the person who's asking about sympathetic danger and the excitement, it's like my nervous system goes, I don't know that place, right? I'm the dorsal. But for somebody who's home away from home is sympathetic, they're going to want that flavor of danger much more than my system's going to want. And they're going to ride that edge of the vagal brake, being released almost to the edge, being able to really feel that danger in a way that is still under the management of ventral. Does that make sense?
It does. And it sort of makes me think about like why we're so attracted to like horror movies or thriller movies and roller coasters and these things. It's because we get to experience these states simultaneously,
And you get to experience them safely while you're safely sitting on your couch, and yet you really are there, right? It's interesting. Music has a similar impact on our nervous system. Music allows us to be with sympathetic rage or anger in a way that is safe and also feels good, right? Dorsal music that brings us to dorsal allows us to be in that despairing, hopeless place in a way that we can actually enjoy. It's called the paradoxical effect of music because we actually can enjoy, being in that despairing place. We can sing along with the person who is, totally despairing, and we can be there and feel it. So yeah, it's interesting to enjoy our states in these ways. Yeah.
100%. I'm just curious to ask this myself, actually. Is there any link between gratitude and the ventral vagus state? Has that been studied at all?
Yes, gratitude, compassion, gratitude, elevation. These are all linked to the nervous system and linked to the ventral. And compassion is, you cannot be compassionate. You cannot be self-compassionate unless you're anchored in ventral. It is biologically impossible. You cannot have gratitude or be grateful unless you have an anchor in ventral. So when somebody, we look at people and say they are so ungrateful, right? If we looked at them, we could say, well, their biology will not allow them to be grateful. It's not that they don't want to be, their biology won't support that. You have no compassion. Their biology won't support it. Yes, there's a lot of research. And gratitude is and compassion are experiences that can build, right? We can become more passionate, more grateful. Interesting. Gratitude is like a one-on-one. You do something and I'm grateful to you. It's this relational experience. There's this other experience called elevation, which is I witness somebody doing a good deed, or I see a good deed, or I see something that moves me, and I am pulled to want to do a good deed in return, but not to you. Like if I witnessed you doing a good deed and I was pulled in that way, I would then want to offer it somewhere else. So it's that pay it forward. And they're all nervous system driven. It's fascinating.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Okay. So the next question is from Anastasia, and Anastasia asks, is it possible to be in more than one state at once, even if it is an element of each or frequently interchanging?
Well, what I'm going to say is we have three blended states that we, at least so far, can identify. One is a freeze state, and we didn't talk about freeze, even though it's so typical in our trauma survivor clients, because there are really two freezes. There's a freeze that is a combination sympathetic dorsal, and that's the freeze, that's that deer in the headlights experience where I'm just rigid like this, but I can't move because my sympathetic is on high, but my dorsal is keeping me immobile, right? And then we have the freeze that's a pure dorsal immobilization where I can't move because I have no energy in my system. So that's a blend. Play is a blend. Play is a blend of sympathetic ventral, right? Vagal break, release, come back. We're highly active and then we're back. That's play. Play is lovely. And you know when sympathetic has overwhelmed ventral, when play turns from fun to fear, when somebody starts crying, right? You look at this with little kids. They're having a lovely time, rough and tumble play, and then the next minute somebody's crying and somebody's screaming, right? Sympathetic is overwhelmed. And the other blend is stillness, which is ventral and dorsal working together. Because dorsal takes me into immobilization, but ventral brings the safety so I can become safely still. So those are blends that we know are happening at the same time. The other thing that I would say to Anastasia is it's not so much that they're happening together, but we have foreground, background. So if you think for a moment, what's in your foreground right now? What state are you mainly in right now? And then when you have that, just look in the background. What state's in the background? So for me, usually, ventral's in the foreground. I usually have a flavor of dorsal in the background because it's such a home away from home for me. It's so familiar. There's usually a flavor. And it can do this, right? It can be like more dorsal, less dorsal, but ventral's in the foreground. I don't think we actually are together in like ventral, sympathetic, dorsal, although we can have aspects of an experience. I was doing a map with someone the other day that were mapping a specific experience, and all three states were alive in it, but not at the same time. If you really get down to the granularity of it, you're going through one. You're very quickly going through them. So I think that's what I would say.
Cool. Whenever you're trying to get yourself in a ventral vagus state, how do you do that?
So, it's interesting for me. I have several ways that are predictably regulating, predictably bring me there. And I have ways that are more or less active because sometimes when I want to get to ventral, I don't have a lot of energy to do it. That's when I go to music, right? Mm-hmm. And I have a playlist, and I have done this with all my clients. It's one of the exercises in my book is to create a musical playlist and I have a pure ventral playlist. So I can just push that when I just want ventral. And then I have a playlist that's shuffled so that I can go through all my states. So just pushing a button is like, that's kind of the easiest thing to do. One of the other things I do to get there is, again, I think sound is a good way for me. So I have audiobooks. I turn on an audiobook, listen to a voice that I'm loving and get pulled into the story. That's an easy way to get back to ventral. I have a cat who predictably brings me to ventral no matter what. And then nature. And again, for me, I really can just look out the back window. There's always something going on in the woods there, which is easy for me. The ocean is my ventral deep experience. And so I can just bring up a memory of walking at the beach or being by the beach. I have beach stones, on windowsills all around my house. I can just pick up a beach stone. So again, when you're looking for a way to get there, you want to look for ways that are simple and easy. You don't have to do this great big long practice. Right? I have a couple of friends that we have an agreement. They're part of my micro community, my polyvagal micro community. I can just send an emoji, and they know what that means. They'll send back the emoji that says, here with you, feel you, what do you need, right? It's so easy. So look for easy things.
Very cool. And are there any breathing patterns that are helpful for getting into
Yeah,
this?
yeah. I will talk about breathing for a minute, and it's great to say that, because breath is both an activator and a regulator. I was breathing and we lost each other. I was saying that breath is the direct route for changing autonomic state, and so play around with breath practices. And we want to be careful, because as we change our breath, breathing rhythms, and a state changes, it can be very dysregulating for clients. It can be dysregulating for us. So the one that I teach and use is sighing, because it is, and we can sigh together. I have an underlying health condition, so when I go to breath practices, it can feel a bit dangerous for my nervous system. So we just want to be careful. But boy, there are some brilliant people who have created breath practices out there. So yes, I would explore those.
Fantastic. Any in particular that you'd recommend?
I just do the very simple. When you understand that a longer exhalation than inhalation brings more ventral, then you can play around with those sorts of practices. There are so many out there. The pranayama practices out of the yoga traditions are all regulating, and sometimes we need more energy, not calming energy. So like the breath of fire, the breath of joy, these are all lovely ways to bring your nervous system what it needs in that moment.
Brilliant. Okay, so just probably one more question here. Let's see, we've got one from, Alexandra. Is it possible to be autistic or have Asperger's if you have a good natural prosody and cues of co-regulation sometimes?
Oh, somewhere on the spectrum. That's a great question. I'm not sure I can intelligently answer that. It's fascinating to think. I have worked with people who will tell me they're on the spectrum, and it's like, let's figure out what particular qualities of that you are, identifying, because, you have a lot of prosody in your voice, and it feels like we're doing this back and forth, and yet they, will identify that. So I'm not sure how to answer that, but it is a great question to think about with a client, to say, so let's explore that. Let's explore the qualities of nervous system activation and connection and see where you fall on that spectrum. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Deb, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge and wisdom with us today. I know your website's rhythmofregulation.com, is that right?
Is, yeah.
And have you got any trainings coming up that people might be interested in getting involved with? Anything on the horizon?
Probably do. They're all on the website. It's interesting because everything's sort of in flux now, moving online, and things are changing. So go to the website and see what happens. I'm just about to post a free 50-minute training video that people can go back to and see. And there are a lot of free resources on the website. So start there and see. My book study group just finished, and it's available now as an archive. If you want to go through chapter by chapter the book, that the Polyvagal Theory and Therapy, that's kind of a fun place to start. But go to the website, explore, see what you find.
Brilliant. Well, I've been reading the book Polyvagal Theory and Therapy, and it's fascinating. It's accessible, so highly recommend that as well for anybody that's tuning in today. So, Deb, we'll let you go. Thank you so much. And
lovely.